In 1914, 24-year-old Frances Hunter was working as a maid at the Goddard Arms in Swindon when her lover, the 22-year-old Walter James White, in a jealous rage, took her to one of the rooms and shot her dead. Legend has it that the pair still inhabit the site, their spirits doomed to forever repeat the events of that fateful night.
Take the left-hand path down to the Shire of Old, where the black shook house as the magic takes hold. Weave the spell into the land as you cast a circle round. Call upon the six and lay your curses down.
Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Tamsin Wheatley and you're listening to Folklore. If you're hearing me for the first time, let me fill you in on what's going on. Several months ago, I was coming home from my job as a late-night radio DJ when I noticed a package outside my front door. It was a box containing a collection of old cassette tapes and one or two ancient-looking reels of tape as well. If you're my age, then receiving mail that isn't a bill is incredibly exciting. My first thought was that it was from a fan of my radio show, a late-night, chilled-out folk music hour on a local radio station. It wouldn't be wrong to think someone had found some recordings of local folk music from back in the 80s or 90s, and actually it would have been pretty cool to hear some stuff from back then. But a week or so later, when I finally got hold of a tape player, I realised how wrong I was. The first tape I listened to was one of the cassettes, as I didn't have access to a reel-to-reel recorder yet. Each of the tapes was marked with a small piece of masking tape and a date scribbled in black marker pen. Every single one looked like it had been hastily applied. As with any new series, I went to the beginning, to the earliest date, the first recording. I had hyped myself up to hear some vintage folk music, so when I heard the voice of my old university lecturer humming out of the cassette player, I was taken aback. A few months ago, I heard on the news that Professor Kneale had been involved in a cave-in while on an archaeological dig, and sadly, his body was never recovered. I never thought I'd hear his voice again. I recognised it right away. I'd listened to him teaching anthropology almost every day for years when I was a student. This version of him, though, was obviously younger, more curious, and a lot less tired of the world. When I'd gotten over the initial surprise, I wound the tape back, a novelty in itself, and listened again from the start.
Henry Kneale, 23rd of March, 1980. I'm just outside of Swindon, about to head into the town centre now, to investigate the supposed strange goings-on at the Goddard Arms public house and hotel. Whether or not this entirely fits into the realms of folklore, I'm not sure, but I was eager to explore the mystery further, since I'd managed to, quite by accident, find myself in touch with someone who promised to engage me with a fascinating story. He'll be meeting me at the pub itself, which is something I'll admit I am fascinated by in and of itself. Perhaps I'll speak to some of the staff and see if they can't corroborate any of the stories I've heard.
Kneale had never really spoken of his interest in folklore, although personally I have a keen fascination with all things ancient and spooky. Naturally, I brought this up on my radio show, wondering if my listeners were as interested in folk stories as they are in folk music. Much to my surprise, it seemed they were.
I was so sorry to hear about your dear professor. For what it's worth, I would love to hear more about him and his stories.
What other kinds of things were there on the tapes then? You can't just give us a little hint and leave us hanging.
I want to hear more of your stories. My mummy played it to me in the car. Did the professor ever go to the Wookiee Hole? Because I heard there's a witch there.
There was more interest than I had counted on, and people seemed desperate to know more. I began to think how I would approach this, given the sheer volume of tapes in the package. And then...
The Prime Minister has announced today that the country will enter into full lockdown as a result of the ongoing coronavirus crisis. People are to remain in their homes and only leave when it is absolutely necessary.
Like many, I found myself furloughed and with a lot of time on my hands. This gave me an opportunity to focus more on the tapes and how I planned to approach exploring them. As the lockdown began to ease off, I was able to venture out, and so this podcast was born. I'm presenting it to you here as it happened to me, although I may jump in occasionally to provide context or explain certain elements I was unable to document at the time. The first tape detailed the unusual occurrences that have reportedly taken place at the Goddard Arms in Swindon. Kneale headed to the location himself, where he interviewed a man with a rather peculiar story to tell.
I'm here in the Goddard Arms in Swindon with Paul Smith, who has agreed to be interviewed. It's approximately 3:37 in the PM. Thank you for doing this for me, Paul.
You're welcome.
So, I know we've already spoken about this, but would it be okay if you could just recount your story for this tape recording?
Of course, yeah.
Great. Okay. Whenever you're ready.
It isn't really my story. I suppose I should get that out of the way first. I'm bringing this to you second-hand, but it's always sort of stuck with me, really. I used to work here when I was younger, and I lived down the road, so I'm familiar with the whole thing. People love a good ghost story, as they say.
They do. You said you were working here. Were you working here when you heard the story?
No, I was just here as a customer then. I haven't worked here in years. I was sitting at the bar, and, as you do, I got chatting to this young lady who said she booked a room here. Pretty little thing she was. Anyway, we got to talking, and maybe I mentioned the whole murder of a sweetheart. I don't know how it came up, but she got all funny, and I asked her what was wrong.
All funny?
Yeah, like her face went white. Excuse the expression, but it was like she'd seen a ghost.
I see.
Anyway, so she starts to tell me the story from the other night, right? She said she was in a room and there was a knock on the door. She said it was an angry knock, like rapid and aggressive. I know what she meant. Sort of. And she felt this, I don't know, discomfort?
Discomfort?
Yeah, she said it went cold, or she went cold. I don't know.
So she was reluctant to answer?
I don't know if that's right, but she felt off. She answered it anyway, and there's this fella stood in the hallway, right? And she described him as being I don't know, soaking wet, she said. Like he'd been out in the rain.
Was it raining? Sorry, is that a no?
Sorry, no, it wasn't raining.
Right. But was he wet?
Yeah, and angry. Really angry. Or perhaps rather more uncomfortable, like hopping about or whatever.
Hopping about?
Well, no, but, what's the word?
Agitated?
Yes, agitated and sort of angry.
Right.
That's what she said, anyway. He was stood there, just sort of agitated. She said he sort of glared at her.
And did he say anything?
He said, "Where is she?"
Where was who?
He just kept saying she over and over. Where is she? Where is she? Like he was looking for his girlfriend or something. The young lady told me he had a look about him that scared her a bit. Like he was going to force his way into her room or something. She told him she was the only one in there and maybe he got the wrong hotel room. But it was like he didn't hear her. When you get so angry you just can't hear anything or see sense. She said it was like that. And he said, really angry, gritted teeth and all, "I'm going to put her in her place."
What did she do?
She shut the door on him in the end because there was no way he was listening to her.
And then what?
She said she listened through the door for a while but didn't hear anything. When she went down for dinner later, she asked the staff if they'd seen anyone. They said no, but then a couple of staff,
What?
This isn't the first time someone's had a story like that, and I heard it back in the day too. I never saw him or nothing, but people talk. They say things like that.
And you believe her?
I don't know, it's weird. I believe she was scared, whatever it was. But was it the ghost of Walter James White? It's not really for me to say.
Of course, a story told second-hand on a tape from the 80s isn't evidence of anything. And there was nothing in Paul's story to suggest to me that it couldn't have been just some drunk bothering the guests at the hotel. Still, I wanted to delve a little deeper, so I decided to go there myself. When I visited the Goddard Arms, Don't worry, lockdown was ending, and it was a week or so after the mad rush of people desperate for their first pint. I was taken aback by the emptiness of the place. Other pubs around the area were a little more busy with people clawing their way out of isolation to have a pint with their mates, but this one was different. It wasn't like how it sounded on Kneale's tape. There was no low chatter of patrons, no laughing drunks, just a quietness in the air, and a bored manager who was all too happy wasting her time talking to me.
Up this way is the room they say it happened in.
Do people stay in the room?
Sometimes. Haven't had any guests recently, of course.
Of course.
You hear the stories. A murder is a big deal, even if it was years ago. People get excited about it. Can we stay in the murder room?
What do you know about them themselves?
You mean Walter and Frances? Not much. She was nice, kept to herself, never really spoke about her personal life. He was a bit of a lad, you know? Outspoken, jealous type, obviously. You only get snippets though. No one here actually knew them, of course. It's just sort of passed down.
Do you know why he did it?
Well, you only hear rumours, right?
Right.
But, as it goes, she was sleeping with someone else. Cliché, I know. Maybe one of the bar staff? I don't know. You hear different things from different people, but I guess he found out.
That would explain the stories about people seeing an angry man looking through his girlfriend.
Yeah, well, so they say.
Have you ever experienced anything?
No.
You're not a believer then?
I didn't say that. It gets cold in here. That always bothers me.
Is that something other people say?
Yeah, and they say they hear things from time to time.
Hear things? Like what?
Crying, shouting, like someone's having an argument.
A couple?
Yeah, and that's the story, isn't it? They were arguing about something and then he killed her. A crime of passion. She broke his heart, so he shot her.
Right.
Devastating, really.
And what else have people said?
Aside from the shouting and the knocking on the door, people have seen him walking around the pub. Some say they've seen him in the lawns, and there's just a feeling.
Sorry, the lawns?
Oh, it's like a park down the road?
Right, okay. And you said there was a feeling?
Yes. Uncomfortable? No, that's not right, really. It's just a feeling.
Like what?
It's cold. Everyone says it gets cold.
I made a note of this at the time, and I think it's probably worth pointing out. Admittedly, it was cold in the room, colder than the hallway, but as she had said herself, the pub hadn't been taking guests. In fact, they hadn't been open for nearly 4 months. I'd be inclined to put the coldness down to a lack of heating rather than anything supernatural. She mentioned people had seen the supposed spirit out on the lawns, a park around the corner from the Goddard Arms, and Kneale, it seemed, had drawn the same conclusion.
They're all out in the woods. The ghosts, I mean. I know this place has its own spook, but it's on the lawns where everyone sees them.
Have you seen them?
I don't believe in ghosts, mate. You're having a laugh.
It's pretty here. Seems odd to me that such a beautiful slice of countryside would be hidden away in the middle of the hustle and bustle of this town. And here it is. There's a sort of stone structure in the middle on a hill. I suspect there's some ghost story thread to pull there. I'll admit, there is an eeriness around me. It's cold and there's a slight fog in the distance, so I'm sure that's part of the story. Still, I'd like to know more about this place.
I wanted to know more too. Not so much about the ghosts, although it was intriguing, but rather because of a strange occurrence on the recording here. I've edited it out for now, but I'll come back to it later. I made my way to the lawn woods and wandered the path I imagined Kneale had all those years ago. It felt oddly comforting, knowing that I was in a place he had been, doing something he had done. In a way, I felt close to him, and I realised in that moment, perhaps for the first time since the news of his death, that I missed him. We hadn't really spoken since I left university, even though I worked on campus. Just the sort of lazy formalities you get sometimes. I don't know whether he considered our relationship a close one at some point. I know I did. But he had lots of students, some of whom he spent far more time with. I always felt, though, that there was a connection between us, in that sort of student-mentor way. I found myself at the stone structure Kneale had mentioned, though it was less of a structure and more the remains of one. The outline of the house, steps leading down to a sort of dip in the earth, and the occasional bit of stone sticking up from the ground. From where I stood, I could see the old church, all Gothic and ancient, complete with off-balance gravestones and a rusty metal fence. It had the feel of a classic ghost story, which felt oddly fitting, all things considered. I was curious, so I did some research. The space had once housed Lawn Manor, the home of the Goddard family. From 1563 to 1927, the Goddards were lord of the manor in Swindon, living on the Goddard estate in the Lawns. The house was first rebuilt around 1770, and some theorise that it may have been the site of a medieval building before that. It was known as Swindon House until 1850, and then later Lawn Manor. The last of the male Goddard heirs, Major Fitzroy Pleydell Goddard, passed away in 1927, leaving behind a widow. Without a Goddard around to take care of the upkeep, the manor fell into disrepair. It was empty by 1932, and after a short occupancy from troops during the Second World War, the house was demolished. In 1952, all that was left of this once great manor home was nothing but outlines of brickwork in the middle of a park. While I had no doubt an old manor house would be the perfect site for some ghostly goings-on, before I could look into this any further, I received a reply to an email I had sent while planning for this episode. During my research, I had, somewhat to my own surprise, managed to find contact details for a man who was, apparently, related to Walter James White. He agreed to an interview, although he requested that he remain anonymous.
Hello?
Hi, is this...
Yeah, who's this?
Hi, it's Tamsin Wheatley. We spoke over email.
Oh, yeah, hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Is now a good time to talk?
Yeah, I'm free now.
I'm recording this, if that's okay. It's for the podcast. I know you wanted to be kept anonymous, and that's all fine.
Yeah, no worries.
So, I was really just hoping that I could ask you some questions about Walter James White and the stories around the Goddard Arms.
Oh, yeah, well, it was a big thing in my house growing up. I know it probably shouldn't have been, but, killer in the family or whatever. People like to talk about that kind of thing, and then you have the whole ghost aspect.
Oh, so you've heard about that?
Of course, who hasn't? I mean, at least around here hasn't, right? We even went there once hoping to catch sight of him. We didn't, and of course my brother and I, when we were little, we wanted to try and contact him or whatever. We even did a Ouija board once.
You sound really interested in it.
Yeah, man, yeah, I am, I guess. I find all of that stuff fascinating, ghosts, goblins, Elvis Presley,
Do you mind if I ask why you wanted to remain anonymous?
I guess just it's sort of embarrassing, isn't it? I know you wouldn't think it. I mean, it was so long ago and everything, but people still look at you different when they know you're related to a killer. I loved it as a kid, but as an adult, it just makes life a bit easier.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
So, you said you and your brother tried a Ouija board?
Yeah, so we tried it. We got one from the charity shop, right? And then we tried to contact him. You hear the stories about people seeing him and stuff, and we thought it might be funny, but also, I don't know, maybe he was more likely to talk to us because we was related or something, you know? So he set it up and whatever, and it worked and all.
It worked?
Yeah, he contacted us. Well, you know, we think it was him.
What did he say?
We asked him what he was up to and that, just like general chit-chat, I guess. It sounds stupid because we was talking to a ghost, but yeah. And he said his name was Walter James White and that, and then he would just keep moving the little thing over the little Y, like, instead of spelling out Y, W-Y-H, he just used it as shorthand.
What did you ask him?
We asked him all sorts of things, like, what's it like down there? Obviously, like, because he'd be down there, and then we'd ask him things like, do you smell, or whatever, because we were kids. I don't know if he took too kindly to that, if you get what I mean.
No?
Well, we got bored in the end, like kids do, and we just quit the whole thing, yeah, went to bed. Figured it was probably my brother doing it anyway, and I guess he figured it was probably me. And then that night, I don't know, we woke up with our mum just shouting, and the smoke alarm is ringing through the house. My mum is shouting for us to get up, and she comes bursting into the room and gets me and my brother out.
There was a fire?
Yeah, a proper one too. The house was fine and that, but it was pretty scary. I just remember the heat, you know, running down the stairs, didn't even look into the room, didn't dare, just got out of the house. The firemen came and put it out fine and everything, and we didn't even have to move out, just stayed at my nan's for a week while they fixed it up. But like, the spookiest bit is the firemen said it started in the living room. They reckoned it was a candle or something that had fallen down and caught something alight, but like, that's where we left the Ouija board.
That is very odd.
Right?
Is that the only experience you've had?
Well, that was the only real big one. But we were always having things going missing and stuff like that. We moved out of the place in like 2005 though, so that sort of stuff stopped after that. My brother and I were convinced it was because of us contacting him though, like, we don't remember creepy things like that from before. When we came clean and told my mum, she was furious, proper mad. She believed in all of it.
What about since moving?
Only once. And I don't even know if it was him or if it was anything. But I went back up to the Goddards just out of curiosity again, right, and had a drink, or whatever, nothing big and that. But I thought I'd take a stroll through the woods after, just sort of taking in the sights. It wasn't late at night or anything, I'm not stupid, but it was evening. And I was walking about a bit tipsy, not gonna lie, and I sat down on the little bench to look out over the lawn estate and stuff, you know? And I was sat there for a bit and got all cold, right? Obviously, I'm outside, so I figure that's nothing, but then, I swear, right, someone tapped me on my shoulder, on my right shoulder, and I turned around to look, but there was no one there, no one. Not even like a dog walker or whatever, no one. And I really genuinely felt this tap, right? It was clear. I could still feel the touch on my shoulder after someone touched it.
That's creepy.
Yeah.
Are you sure it wasn't just maybe something falling out of a tree? A branch or something?
I would have heard it, right? Anyway, this had pressure, and it wasn't just like one tap. It was like tap, 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 you know, like, look at me. Look at me. They wanted me to turn around.
And you think this was Walter James White?
I don't know. I was at the Goddards before, so I don't know, but still, it's pretty weird. It gives me shivers just thinking about it. I've never been back there, never.
Although my contact story was interesting, and I did feel that his personal connection to our spirit had an impact on how I received it, I wasn't entirely sure how much stock I could put in the validity of his claims. The most interesting part, after all, was the memory of a belligerent child who had bought a Ouija board to have a laugh with his brother. The other, a drunken encounter with what was potentially just a conker, with a serious lack of evidence. And house fires are a tragedy, but a candle falling over is by no means evidence of supernatural interference. I was inclined to discount his anecdotes entirely, except for the fact that there were some small similarities with someone that Kneale met with all those years ago.
Okay, great. Could you just Let me know your name.
Stephanie Ayers.
Thank you. And you're a waitress here at the Goddard Arms, yes?
Yes, that's right.
And how long have you worked here?
A year now.
Thank you for agreeing to talk with me.
You're welcome.
Your manager said I should speak with you about the strange goings-on in the area. Could you describe the encounter you had recently for the sake of this recording?
Well, I was on my way home. It must have been about 1 a.m. Obviously there were drunks walking home and stuff, so I was a bit wary as I was making my way back, you know?
Totally understandable.
So I was walking through the lawns, which is always a bit creepy anyway, and I see a few men hanging about to one side. So I went another way, down through Lawnwoods. I don't usually take this route because it's dark and stuff, so I decided the best thing to do was to head straight across, spend as little time there as possible. I start across and already I'm feeling a little, because it's dark and I can hear the drunks in the distance all shouting and whatnot. And it was June, mind, so it wasn't particularly bad weather, but all of a sudden I was freezing, right? So I pulled my cardigan out of my bag to put it on, and while I stood there for a second, and I don't know why, but everything went quiet, like just for a second it was silent. And not silent like we know, but proper silent. And then a hand just grabbed me on the shoulder.
It grabbed you?
Well, it was more like it was on my shoulder, but I could definitely feel fingers. It had a grip, at least not strong, and it didn't pull or anything, but it was there. Anyway, I turned around ready to punch someone for freaking me out, but there was nobody there. No sign of anyone.
Is it possible it could have been those men you saw before? Might they have hidden behind a tree or hedge?
No. I could still hear them chattering away back near the entrance to the park. As soon as I felt it, all the sounds seemed to come rushing back, and I turned around quick, so if they'd run behind a tree, there must have been like red rum or something. No, there was nobody there, and I was so cold. I practically ran through the rest of the park to get to my place. Anyway, I don't know why, but it didn't feel like a man's hand. It didn't feel like a person.
What do you mean? Could you explain that a little further?
The fingers were long, and it was cold, like ice cold. That was what was the biggest shock. If anything, the sudden freezing on my shoulder. Like I said, it was already cold, and then this sharp, harsh, ice cold is on my shoulder. And I swear, maybe it gave a little squeeze just in that instance. And then I turned around and it was gone.
Now, take from that what you will. I'll admit it unsettled me, but in my opinion, it was pretty flimsy to say that the anecdotal evidence of two drunken people can be seen as proof that ghosts exist in Swindon's lawns. It is far more likely that after a few drinks, people get excited and their minds play tricks on them. I'm not saying they didn't experience anything, just that they may have exaggerated the happenings in their minds in order to explain something that their drunk selves couldn't make sense of. It's not uncommon. We lose segments of our night if we drink too much and have to fill it in the next day with what we assume has happened. I think, wherever there is darkness, be that the literal darkness of the woods at night or the emotional darkness of the location of a tragic murder, we are always more inclined to seek something that isn't there. A noise, a creaking floorboard, or a door being blown shut in the wind takes on a whole new meaning when placed within that context. A lot of these stories also share common or even cliched tropes used in fiction. Writers like M.R. James have been using these kinds of setups for years. It's not too much of a stretch to imagine this kind of ghost story iconography influencing people in their own supposed supernatural encounters. After all, anytime I turn the light off, I'm certain the girl from The Ring is coming for me. I'm sure you will draw conclusions for yourselves, or, if you dare, visit the Goddard Arms or the Lawns and see what you find. Our story doesn't end here though, listeners. After all, I promised to return to that one tiny little thing that intrigued me earlier on Kneale's tape. This small snippet, seemingly recorded sometime after Kneale's examination of the Goddard case, caught my attention and confused me enough to find it worth mentioning. I decided to leave it out before and play it for you here. The audio is poor quality. I assume he was outside somewhere, but if you listen, you can just make out what he says.
And I wonder if Eugenia liked marmalade.
I don't know why, but this unsettled me. There seemed to be some sort of fear, or at the very least an uncertainty in his voice. To find it here with no clear connection or reason for it also didn't sit well with me. I know I was most likely being superstitious, but this seemed important somehow. I'll pose a question to you now, as I did pose to my listeners at the time. Who was Eugenia, and why was Kneale so interested in whether she liked marmalade? It sounds an odd thing to get hung up on saying it out loud, I know, but I'm glad I did. As it turns out, there is more to this strange snippet than initially meets the eye.
Take the left-hand path down to the Shire of Old, where the black shook house as the magic takes hold. Weave the spell into the land as you cast a circle round. Call upon the six and lay your curses down.
Thank you for exploring this mystery with me, Tamsin Wheatley. You've been listening to Folklore. To get in touch and share your thoughts, please search @folklore_pod on Twitter, or find us on the official Folklore Twitter and Facebook pages. If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, subscribe, and give us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you found us, to help us reach even more listeners. You can also join in the discussion over on our official Folklore Facebook group, or you can support Folklore and help make magic happen over on Patreon. And in exchange, you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive content, including some behind-the-scenes snippets, bonus stories, and extra interviews. Join me again next episode, where I'll be delving further into Kneale's tapes and exploring the mystery surrounding the terrifying black shuck in the Wiltshire countryside.
With the hand of glory from the King's Mound, I evoke the quarters to the west gates of hell. Take the left-hand path down to the Shire of Old, where the black shook house as the magic takes hold. Weave a spell into the land as you cast a circle round. Call upon the six and lay your curses down.